And to my right, 1, 2, 3 tables back, we have a Spanish language translator available there. Okay, it looks like everyone is settled. Good evening. District 203 staff, parents, caregivers, and other members of the community. My name is Dr. Rakita Leeks, and I'm the Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to facilitate tonight's discussion to help us all better understand implicit bias. I want to open this evening's session with a quote that reminds us why it's important to engage in conversations about race, bias, and other tough topics. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other." Topics like this help us to more effectively communicate with each other, to get to know each other, to learn more from one another, and to better understand each other. So since tonight we will do a lot of sharing at our tables, I would like for you all to take a moment to introduce yourselves to one another. Share your name, your District 203 affiliation, such as if you're a parent or a staff member or a community member, community advocate, or any other affiliation that you might have with Naperville 203. Then share what interests you about this topic and what are you hoping to learn or take away from tonight's conversation. I'll give you a few minutes to talk amongst yourselves. I have a quick announcement about the Chromebooks and the Focus 203 forms. We're currently working to fix it. It will update itself, so if you've tried to input any information and it wasn't able to go through, shortly you will actually be able to do so. So just a heads up. Another 30 seconds to wrap up your conversation, and we're going to come back together as a whole group. Huh? Sort of. Okay, let's come back together as a whole group. Next, we're going to do a little activity that will require you to just pause and think about what I will have to say, so you don't have to actually say anything aloud. If you feel comfortable doing so, I would like for you to close your eyes and draw a mental picture of the categories of people that I will name. So I'll give you a moment, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. Draw a mental picture of a school principal. Now draw a nurse. A police officer. A medical doctor. A terrorist. A welfare recipient. An athlete. Lastly, a criminal. At this time, you can open your eyes. Again, you don't have to respond aloud, but think about who you saw when I said a school principal, or a police officer, a terrorist, a welfare recipient, a criminal. And then take a moment to reflect on what you think shaped how you envisioned those individuals. So just give you a moment to just reflect on what possibly made you think, regarding like what those people might have actually looked like. Testing. Okay, great. So we're going to come back to that. But I just want you to sit with that for a minute. We're going to transition to an activity, just to mix it up a bit, that I'm incorporating a way for you to engage electronically. So if you have a smartphone or a laptop, I encourage you to take it out at this time. And you can participate in this poll. It's a live poll by either texting 203-EQUITY to 37607, or you can respond directly by using the website that you see listed on this slide. And don't worry, if you don't have a smartphone or a laptop, you can still participate with pen and paper. So now, text, type, or write down the first 3 words to come to mind when you hear the phrase implicit bias. I'll give you a few minutes to complete that task. By show of hands, let me know if you need more time. So I'll give another minute. Is there anyone here willing to share what they notice on the screen? Racism stands out. Any other noticing? Stereotypes? Unconscious? Why do you think I asked you to do this activity? Is there anyone willing to answer that question? Exactly. We all have a different understanding of what implicit bias means, and that understanding could actually be based on any formal or informal knowledge we might actually have about it, or any experiences that we've had. So that is one reason why. So I actually need someone from tech to come up and switch the slides. But there's another important reason why I wanted you all to do that activity. Okay, and that's to show that oftentimes people use the words racism and implicit bias interchangeably. But implicit bias and racism are not the same. I'm going to repeat that. Implicit bias and racism are not the same. Racism is the belief that one set of characteristics is superior to another. It combines power and prejudice and can be a system of oppression that was intentionally created to deny equity and justice. People in positions of power can be racist. As a collective, dominant groups can be racist. Institutions and systems can be racist. Implicit biases are defined by the Corwin Institute as attitudes or stereotypes that are activated unconsciously and involuntarily. Implicit biases affect our actions, understandings of events, and even decisions that we make in an unconscious manner that may advantage some and disadvantage others. So, the important difference is that we all carry biases. It is a natural human function. Bias can be shaped by early life experiences, the media, formal and informal education, among other things. However, we must be cognizant of the fact that the messaging that we have received throughout our lives about some groups might be limited, narrow perceptions that might even be overly negative and one-sided, and in some cases just flat out erroneous. Social scientists believe that implicit biases are learned as young as age 3. Although racism and implicit bias are different by definition, they can still have the same damaging effects on some groups. Again, I will repeat that. Although racism and implicit bias are different by definition, they can still have the same damaging effects on some groups. That is why it is important to be aware of any bias that we might have. Again, tonight's conversation is not about racism. Instead, we will focus on implicit bias. Also, our discussion is not about shame and blame. It is about understanding. But be prepared to experience the discomfort that courageous conversations like this one might bring. In fact, being uncomfortable is to be expected. It signals growth and learning. And if you are not feeling any sense of discomfort in the dialogue, ask yourself, are you fully engaged? And are you giving yourself fully and taking risks? So now we will watch a few short clips that will help guide our discussion about implicit bias. After it ends, we'll take a few minutes to turn and talk to the people at our tables about our reactions to the video. So I'll play the first one.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term right here in American society. A lot of times when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I
actually deep down inside have been taught that black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem. One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
All right, so now I want you to take a few minutes to turn and talk to the people at your table about your reactions to the video. Okay, I'll give you another 30 seconds to wrap up your conversation, and we'll come back together as a whole group. Okay, let's come back together as a whole group. And I'm looking for one or two volunteers who is willing to share either their personal reaction to the video or kind of the general consensus at their table. Do we have any volunteers? Yes. We're going to get the second microphone.
So the Harvard Implicit Bias Test is an online test that challenges you to make quick assumptions about things with people rapidly, and then that kind of rates you on how much your implicit bias is. And I have to say, thank
Thank you. Can everyone hear me now? Mm-hmm. All right. So, so you're rated on how well you do. You know, are you? So anyway, my point is, I took this. I thought I would do much better than I did, and it was a real eye-opening experience because, yeah, I thought I would do better than that.
And I'm glad you actually brought that up, and I will actually talk a little bit more about that, the implicit association test in one of the later slides, so thank you for bringing that up. Any other volunteers? We have one, okay.
So we were talking about how the differences when they were talking about the differences with the media and how all that kind of becomes a fog almost that you breathe that affects the implicit bias that you don't even realize that you have. And I mentioned how when in the beginning you said think of a police officer, think of a school principal. Everybody that pops in my head came from a TV show. Like, it was like, think of a police officer. I immediately thought of Carl Winslow.
Yep.
Think of this, and I immediately thought of another TV character. And it was just because it's so inundated in your head from things that you see.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like went right back to what they were saying about that fog that you're constantly breathing and don't realize.
Yes, the media certainly influence us much more than we would like to admit. And I will share some examples of implicit bias in the media in the later slides as well.
The peanut butter and jelly kind of brought me home because I didn't eat jelly until I was 9 years old. So the peanut butter and jelly is something that's different because growing up in the South and taking my lunch to school, I had a saltine crackers and peanut butter and put two together, and that was my sandwich. No jelly. So it's kind of interesting that there was a bias right there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To wherever you have grown up in, whatever culture and society you came from, there was a bias, and it doesn't always tell the truth. Mm-hmm. Exactly what we're here to talk about today.
Thank you for sharing. Any others? Okay, some of the key points or we have one other. That'll be the last one.
When I think of this subject, I always begin with we're all creatures of God, loved by God the same. But we have a problem. I take a lot of newspapers, and if you read the newspapers, if there's a crime, they picture the person, it's usually a black. And I used to head the Division of Corrections in a major city, and most of the people were black. Recently, I went to our class reunion, a large public high school. And in my wife's class, the president of the class at that time was black. The smartest kid in the class was black. And at that time, the single parenting rate of blacks and whites was about the same. Today, in the Chicago public schools, which I've had a lot to do with, probably 80% of the kids there have single mothers. And the family is not strong, and so the kids don't like education, and then they drop out, and as you know, then they get in trouble. And so I think that one of the things we've got to begin to focus on is the family. And many black writers are saying this, but these are conservative black writers, and I think we ought to listen to them. The family is the key, and so I would hope that we would begin to help the black family. Everybody with the same family, whether you're black, white, or Hispanic, would have the same chance. So that's my message is let's start working to help the family, strengthen the family, especially the black family.
Thank you. And as a district, of course, we are very supportive of all of the families and the different family structures that exist in our district. And just a reminder that our conversation today, we're going to hone in is like learning more about what implicit bias is. One of the key takeaways that I had hoped that you all would really get from this is that everyone can be, and actually are, we're all biased. No one is exempt from that. And so this is not a black issue, it's not a white issue, this is a people issue. But also, for us to understand that some of, again, that messaging that we have received about some groups might be limited, narrow perceptions that could also be one-sided and very negative, which will lead us to believe certain things about certain groups that might, again, have those damaging effects on decisions that we make, how we interact with them, and how we understand the events that happens in the world every day. So. Now, the important thing to note is that all is not lost. Once we know and we recognize and acknowledge that we have implicit biases and we know what they are by doing things like such as taking the implicit association tests, once we identify them, we can unlearn them. Right? So it doesn't mean that because we've had these biases for whatever reason, and it doesn't have to be just about race, it could be about a lot of other marginalized groups or any other types of categories of people. The great thing is that once we become aware, we can unlearn it. All right, so author Malcolm Gladwell sums up the concept of implicit bias in this quote. He says, "We don't deliberately choose our unconscious attitudes, and we may not even be aware of them. The giant computer that is our unconscious silently crunches all the data it can from the experiences we've had, the people we've met, the lessons we've learned, the books we've read, the movies we've seen, and so on, and it forms an opinion. Our brain scans our environment for who belongs, that means who's safe, and who is others, and that's potentially who's a threat or who's dangerous. Who we come to categorize as belonging or threatening is learned as a result of structural inequalities and messaging that we have received about categories of people. Harmful associations we carry can lead us to make assumptions that can have real life and death consequences for people of color and other marginalized groups. So now, I will walk you through a few examples of what implicit bias looks like in the media. So take a moment to look at these news clippings. They're also available on your packets that you've received if you need to see it more clearly. Take note. What do you see? What's similar? What's different? What message is being conveyed? Once you've had some time to think about that, I want you to turn and talk to the people at your table about what you see. I'll give you a few minutes for that. Okay, let's come back together as a whole group. The microphone. Do we have one volunteer who's willing to share what they noticed about these news clippings?
We talked about how the headline on the left showcases their accomplishments, that they're University of Iowa wrestlers, so it tells you about what the person has done, but then on the right, we don't get to know anything about those people. It doesn't showcase their accomplishments or anything about them except the crime that they committed.
Thank you. Any other noticings?
So in the headlines, we can infer that they've all been arrested, so they don't have mugshots. Three of the guys, I doubt that they arrived at the police station in a shirt and tie, so they're probably yearbook photos. Whereas the others, I would believe that they've probably just been arrested at that point and are in a police station, and that's how they arrived. So one sort of makes them look better, more presentable, whereas the other does not.
And just to piggyback off of that same thing, so the kids that are in the school pictures, basically it creates a picture for the public's eye, or even the people who are responsible for judging them, right? Filing the charges and convictions and so forth and so on. It makes it look like, oh, they're kids, they probably just made a mistake. They're going to school, again, highlighting the accomplishments, but then the black kids, you don't know what, they could be students too. They could belong to a great university, sports or whatever, but it makes them appear as if this is something that they do. So it just creates that vision, basically judging a book by its cover there. And so obviously it gives them a headway, a leeway to have those school pictures there. So
Thank you. I think we can take a couple more.
And somebody pointed out on our table, I didn't even notice it when we were first reading it, the University of Iowa wrestlers, their burglary charges are pending. The other ones are arrested and they're being investigated. Not another implicit bias there.
Our table discussed the forced perspective that each different article is giving you. So for the wrestlers boys, it feels like it's forcing the perspective of you of like a family member, and so you're seeing them from, like sympathetically, and then it's forcing this other perspective as almost the victim, as if like that's what it would look like when they were actually like robbing you. And so it's this forced way that you're supposed to look at it, which we thought was just interesting and alarming.
Thank you. We'll take one last one.
See how fast I can get there. For the group of boys on the right, they don't even use a noun to describe them. The three on the left are wrestlers, but the four are just four.
That's interesting. That's an interesting noticing. So here's another. Again, take note of what you see, then discuss with the people at your table for a few minutes. When you're ready, you can start discussing. All right, let's come back together as a group. Are there any volunteers willing to share your reactions to these two news clippings?
We just noticed that the caption on the right, the fact that this boy had a troubled past is irrelevant to the story, and what was the need to put that in the caption?
We noticed the same thing, and his name isn't mentioned. It's mentioned that he's a son. It could have said a young man dies, saving his mother, for example, giving him a little more credibility. The other one, his name is mentioned. He's a loner, which one of our table mates said that it could indicate a mental illness, for example, and caught, his actions are being put in a passive voice. He was caught in internet evil, and he even has family to support, his actions or whatever. So they're very different, and one is a criminal, and obviously one was a victim, but they're not portrayed in those lights.
Thank you. Any other?
Well, with the Dylan Roof article, if I wasn't aware of the article and the person, I would think this was an 11 and 12-year-old kid that shot people in a church. Instead, I get an adolescent misled and decided to shoot up a church. But on the right, I have, like the other lady said, that this young man doesn't have a name, and he has a troubled past. So without reading the story, the first thing that will pop in my head is, well, this kid just got caught breaking a crime instead of saving his mother's life. Mm-hmm. And the other kid, Dylan Roof, I would figure he just won the spelling bee. Mm-hmm. So that's the media's implicit bias, the powers that be decided to portray those two individuals as crosses. It's the wrong message, I think, in the writing, the headline of the story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One more.
Additionally, not just the writing, the picture on the right looks like a mugshot picture. Why would you use that picture to say that this boy jumped in front to save his mother? It would be a bit more appropriate to maybe put a picture of him with his mother or something to portray this story. I mean, that also adds to the idea when you start reading Son with Troubled Past to think that he just got arrested for something.
Thank you. Oh, wait, we have one. Okay, no, I think we can move on. Okay, so here's another. Again, ask yourself, what message is being conveyed? Then discuss with the people at your table. You have 3 minutes to discuss. Just a reminder, you also have all of these slides listed in your packets, available in your packets if you can't see.
Or I can just, or I guess just stay. Okay, I'll set up mine. That's okay.
All right, so I'm going to actually read it because some of you might not be able to see. So the one image to your left reads, 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store after Hurricane Katrina came through the area in New Orleans, Louisiana. And then the one to your right reads, a young man walks through chest-deep flood water after looting a grocery store in New Orleans on Tuesday, August 30th, 2005. Okay, let's come back together as a whole group and we'll just get a couple of reactions. Just a couple. We need to move on. So are there any volunteers who's willing to share what they noticed about these news clippings?
I'm sorry, here I go again. But looting, I mean, like who would, I don't know if you, I thought it was like a comic thing where we were just saying like it's almost funny that the word usage, so who would loot a store and jump chest deep in water? Like it just doesn't make sense. And then they mentioned Katrina, like these are victims of a natural disaster where the other one, you know, is just going through some flood type thing. And obviously it seems that they're the same event, Hurricane Katrina, but they didn't mention it in the looting picture. And since they're probably from up, we really don't know what was going on, like how they got in this water or anything. So, I mean, the verb or the word usage is very suggestive of the image that they want to be given to the onlooker.
Thank you. There's a
So one thing that someone in my group pointed out was just that first word. Like the people on the left are waiting, which means, you know, there's like kind of like a struggle there, you know, whereas on the right it's like walking, like, oh, like that seems kind of casual. And then also on the left it says like they needed bread and soda, whereas on the right they don't specify like what they're taking at all. So I feel like the whole idea of like waiting and like bread and soda are like really basic things. Like it gives them like this sense of like desperation and like this compassion for these people, whereas the one on the left, there isn't. The one on the right. Yeah.
You know.
The image on the left uses the word local grocery store. It implies that they're in their own neighborhood, and that's left out of the image on the right to imply that maybe he doesn't even belong there at all.
Okay, one last one, really, back there. Then we're.
Well, one of the other things, other than the one on the left talking about the residents as if that they belong there, the one on the right looks like a child. And they describe him as a young man, as if he's older than what he is. And he looks to me to be maybe a young teenager. And so it just makes, it ages him where he could just be helping his family, just like the one on the left, but it just makes it look worse.
All right, so we are going to watch another short clip. And then afterwards, like all the others, you have an opportunity to reflect on what you saw.
Let's look at how to measure bias in ourselves and in others. Here's Dolly Chuk from NYU.
We sent emails to real professors in real universities.
They contacted over 6,500 professors at random from 260 American universities.
We sent them an email that looked like it came from a real person asking for a meeting to learn more about the PhD program in that university. But we randomly assigned whether the fictional person sending that email had a name that sounded male or female and sounded white, Chinese, Hispanic, Indian, or black. What we found that is if you were a white male, you were far more likely to receive a response back than if you were in all those other categories put together as a group.
Some of this could be explicit racism, but it's far more likely that in many cases these professors are just busy. They can't respond to every email they get, so they kind of let their subconscious decide for them. And that's where their biases come through. Research shows that our racial biases are often more about who we choose to help than who we don't. And we tend to help people who are similar to us. But you aren't 6,500 randomly selected professors. So how can you figure out where you might be making similar unconscious choices? First, there's a well-known test online you can take that can help show you biases you hold. Or
just do an audit. Whatever data you have, whether it's formal data in a computer or whether it's just data that's sort of anecdotal, look at the data. For example, I met this fantastic executive in Silicon Valley. He takes great pride in being someone who actively tries to achieve gender balance on his teams, knowing that Silicon Valley and tech are skewed heavily male.
So he looked at his professional social network, his Twitter, his LinkedIn.
He found his network was far more skewed male than he expected. So there's a place where he could actively work to shift that, and that's what he's been doing since then.
So this is not a scientifically exact self-audit, but it can still be useful, and you can audit anything. So maybe start by taking that online test for bias. Maybe check out whose emails you're replying to. But you can also audit yourself for implicit bias by asking a friend to observe you in the real world. If you're a teacher, have people look at who you call on most in class, whatever your interactions are.
One practical thing that people should do is take stock of their friends. It would be very useful for people to actually make lists of people with whom they spend time.
Look for patterns. That's the audit. That's the assessment we can all do.
All right, so talks amongst yourselves about what you saw, any reactions that you have to the video. Okay, let's come back together as a group. Again, do we have any volunteers who are willing to share your reactions to this video?
We talked at my table about diversifying your network and how it can be difficult, for example, if you are a teacher in an all-white school. But I think, a school with all-white teachers. And I think that that can even go back to who the principal chooses to pick for their resume and just broadening that picture to see like, okay, why is my staff all white? Why is my principal not interviewing these people or inviting them back and just looking like broadening your lens a little bit when you're looking at those issues.
Thank you. Any other reactions? One in the back, and then we'll.
Hi, me again. Okay. So we just had a little conversation about how we get along, right, at school events and social events, and we're diverse here, but there are not a lot of true friendships built outside of that to really get to know one another. And there is a family that we're really, I think, close with, and we hang out, but I can count it on my hand, right? A white family. But even still, when they have like huge parties, we walk in and it's probably one or two, maybe three black people there, right? So there's still an elephant in the room, I was saying, right? And vice versa. I've talked to white people who've walked in a room full of black people. There's still an elephant in the room. And I think that exists because we still have these deep-rooted implicit biases, one of not being accepted, and two, that we are so different that is going to make a difference when we're all just people. So, I mean, I think that's something I still have to work on too. I mean, me being me with my personality, I don't care. I am who I am. But I know that for a lot of people, that still holds true. So, I don't know, like, how do we get past that part to where we can have some true, real friendships outside of the social gatherings, you know, and the school things or fundraisers and so forth and so on? How can we not be so afraid to really get in there and get to know one another, you know? So that's just my thought.
I'm not sure if this person is in the room, but I know there's an organization where it's in Naperville, where families will get together over dinner, people from a variety of backgrounds, and Kristen Fitzgerald, do you recall the name of the organization? It has neighbor in it. Yeah. Yeah, and so in order to break down those barriers, those walls, just encouraging people to come talk over food, because we all love food, you know, and just get to know each other. And that's something that's right in our community that happens. And so it's a way to step outside of our comfort zones, to become more exposed to people from a variety of backgrounds right in our own community. So that's just one example of that. Yes.
Ironically, in 1984, that concept began here in Naperville, with the diversified parents group that was established by myself and my wife sitting next to me, and it died. It died. 1984, ladies and gentlemen. 1984, Mr. Superintendent. 1984, Doctor. Why are we not looking at instituting these things and starting it up again?
Fair call to action. Any other comments? Okay. All right, so we have referenced Project Implicit a few times. Someone in the audience mentioned it, and it was in one of the videos. So psychologists at Harvard, the University of Virginia, and the University of Washington created Project Implicit. And that was to develop these hidden bias tests that are called the implicit association tests, or the IATs. And they basically measure unconscious bias. This test is free to participate and is available online, but please note it is a bona fide research study. So if you participate, you're participating in their research study. It measures unconscious or automatic bias and a person's willingness to examine their own bias is an important step in understanding the roots of stereotypes and prejudice in our society. So it is a resource that's available to you if you are interested in further examining your own bias. I do encourage you to take it. It not only examines racial bias, potential racial bias, but also it looks at gender, and then beyond just black-white race, also other racial groups like Asian or Latinx or Hispanic. And then also the LGBTQ, different religions that have signifiers based on their attire or wardrobes. So like people who practice Islam or the Sikh community, among others. So it's a very interesting thing. So they have, oh gosh, they probably have like 20 different tests that you could take to examine any potential biases that you have about a variety of groups. So that leads us to the last clip that we will actually watch. So we'll take a moment to watch this one, and then just as the others, we will turn and talk to the people at our tables about our reactions to the video.
I'm a white male, and I am prejudiced.
A few months ago, a man called into a TV show trying to be less racist.
What can I do to change?
Get to know black families. Join a church if you are a religious person that is a black church. Foster conversation in your family and in your neighborhood where you're asking exactly those kinds of questions.
Okay, clearly that was an amazing conversation. But will her suggestions work? Does it sound a little too easy?
One study I really like here is a study where they looked at college freshmen. Some white undergraduates will get randomly assigned to a white roommate, and some of them will get randomly assigned to a black roommate. What researchers found is that for white undergraduate students who were randomly assigned to a black roommate, they had reduced levels of implicit racial bias at the end of a semester compared to the students who had a white roommate.
So this example uses black and white roommates, but of course this could apply to many kinds of people and interactions. Where this gets tricky.
Now, I'm not suggesting that one just goes out in an artificial way and start curating diverse friendships.
And I would hate if someone came up to me as an Asian person and they're like, well, I want to get to know Asian people better. And so I'm going to make friends with Calvin because he's Asian.
Okay, so don't literally walk around carrying a checklist, but know that spending significant time hanging out across racial lines is backed by science as a way to start tackling bias.
And so your ability to just say, this is what I have these fears and prejudices, and I want to get over them, is one of the most powerful things that we can do right now at this moment in our history. So thank you.
Next time, you have to be careful not to overthink things. Overthinking things can lead to racial anxiety.
Okay, so take a few minutes to process what you saw and to talk amongst yourselves about your reactions to the video. Okay, let's come back together as a whole group. And again, I'll ask if there are any volunteers who's willing to share. See some hands already going up. Reactions to this video.
So I've shared this before in a different forum, similar topic, and it's something that I had to do for myself. So I'm originally from Alabama, and so I was taught as a child that when you see a certain group of people coming down the street, you don't make eye contact. You don't talk. You say, yes, ma'am, no, sir. You continue on your way. I was taught that as a child. And so when I went into the field that I'm in, so I'm an engineer, it's a lot of male and it's a lot of white males. And so for me as a person, I had to reteach myself to go up to people and say hi, to not feel as if I am inadequate and shouldn't be in the room. And it's something that I had to look into myself, and it's taken years to get to that point, and it's been 12, 13 years now, so I'm fine. But, I have a second grader in the district, and as much as possible, I'm trying to not pre-program or, just be a nice person, be nice to people, respect people. And so it's just kind of building that. And I have some people here that also attend the same school, and we're having conversations. So building that sense of community, it takes work. It's not, you can't just sit back and think it's going to happen. You have to actively participate in your community, actively engage people, and then it will help with some of these biases and issues.
Thank you.
Hello again. At my table here, we were just discussing actually getting to know people in the community. Instead of just having to come to Focus 203, some people here because they're getting paid, they have to come. Some people come in just because it's something to do. But we have to engage each other in a more social climate. I want to do a little test. I've been doing it where I started this last year. How many people in this room have I invited to one of my summer softball games? Raise your hands. There's a mixture of people, even though they don't show up or they're not that good. But, not that good. Okay, yeah. But, just by the people that's here, I've invited a lot more. If I haven't met you, I haven't invited you yet. I'm sorry. But I invite everybody across the community that I meet at Focus 203 meetings and Councilman Benny White's meetings, just to build community. Everybody needs to just try. A softball game isn't big, and it's low-pitch softball, no gloves needed for those real, geriatric people. You might hurt yourself. But it's all in fun and community. We need to do that more often. It doesn't have to be softball. It's just some type of event to get to know one another. Even if you're not playing, you're just sitting on the bleachers, meeting somebody else, having a conversation. That's one of the things that we need to do if we're going to truly be a real community. Thank you.
Another one up front.
Thank you. As a current resident of Naperville since 1983, I had an opportunity to grow up here. I had an opportunity to be one of 10 black kids in the entire high school. What that did for me is put things in reverse. We had to learn to live with our white counterparts. We had to learn to live with the families within this community. My parents, my family had to learn to live with other families. The gentleman back here has been here since 1984, 74. He can also share with this comment that it was meeting with other families is what helped break down these stereotypes. Letting people know that in high school, Black people do swim. Black people do ski. Black people do all of these things was my challenge to help break down these stereotypes. I did that by having friends. I did that by having white friends. I had no choice. I had white friends, I had Asian friends. Everybody was friends. And we met their families. And their families learned something about my family that they probably never would have learned had they not met me.
Thank you. I think we had one other in the, and is that the last, that might be the last person. Purple.
And I was just going to say something very similar, that since we're here for, obviously, our children, that we need to encourage them to invite their friends to the house, and then we can sit with the, we can be those weird parents who sit with teenagers or young kids and ask them. My son, he invited a friend over on Monday, MLK Day. So they wanted to go to the gym. So in the car, I said, guys, why are you out of school? They're like, it's a holiday. And I said, what holiday is it? And they're like, MLK. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. What does that mean? They're like, I don't know. I said, well, what school do you go to? You should get a refund. They thought that was the funniest thing. So I told them, go to school tomorrow. Ask each of your teachers what's the significance of MLK. Like, why'd you give us a whole day off? And just to have these conversations. Then we came back, we ate, or they ate. They watched The Office that, those boys do. And, they had a good time. And I said, so what did your friends think? He's like, okay. Two other boys said, Muhammad, when am I going to your house? Right? So they had a good time, and we can break down these fears and stereotypes and over food, and the parents could get to know each other and know that we're the only thing, we're all human. We have similarities, differences. We can grow, love, respect each other, and support each other. And I think that we have to start focusing on the kids as well.
Great final comments. Okay, so that actually brings us to the end of tonight's session. So the very last thing that I would like for you to do is, before we part, I would like for you, each person in the room at your tables, to share one major takeaway that you have after participating in tonight's session. So what's one thing that you really got out of tonight's discussion that you can take away? So talk with your peers about that, and then we'll do a few share outs. Thank you. All right, let's come back together as a group. Are there any volunteers willing to share one major takeaway that you got out of tonight's conversation? All the way in the back.
I do have a takeaway, right? My takeaway is I'm not saying biases are wrong, biases are right, or anything of that sort. I think biases are there for a reason, right? Let's be aware of these biases. Let's understand. But at the same time, there is something called the gut, something called where the bias is coming from that can't be ignored, right? I'll share a 20-second story. I know we're at the tail end of this. I had a similar training at work, and the person who was facilitating the training shared his own story, that he bought some baseball tickets online, met this gentleman at a Starbucks, and looked at him and said, I don't know if these tickets are real or not, or they're fake, right? And at that point, he's like, I caught myself, and I said, oh, I'm teaching a course. And here's shame on me, right? He's like, I felt horrible. He's like, I'm going to absolutely clear my mind. I didn't think of this. Oh my God. Had a good conversation with the kid. The kid got these as a gift from his dad, but wanted to spend money for prom night, whatnot, right? Everything good. He's like, I walk away. I go to the baseball game. The tickets are counterfeit, right? So the takeaway is, yes. Did I walk in with a bias? Yes. Did I look at that individual as with shades on? Yes. Have I completely ignored that? What I personally struggle with is if we absolutely ignore everything that I've ever learned, then, I mean, come on. I mean, look at me. When I walk into a room, people do look at me. And I need to be a little understanding too. They're looking at me. If you look at the last 10, 15, 20 years of what's happened in the world, they're forming these biases based on some facts that have been shared with them, right? Of course, there's a lot of opinions, a lot of judgments, but there's some truth to it. So I think the bias or the unconscious bias goes both ways. If people are being biased, the others also have to understand that they're not just being malicious. It's something that things have happened on this planet. Yep. I don't know, just 2 cents.
Very good reminder that, again, none of us are exempt. Biases, natural human function. Our brains are trying to make sense of the world, and so that we're not overthinking everything. But again, because we do know that, unfortunately, we live in a society where certain messagings about certain groups might be skewed more negative than others, it is important for us to be aware of those, right? And to try to discern, to be more thoughtful and critical about, decisions that we're making and how we're interacting with people. But absolutely, safety is certainly comes first. But sometimes it takes us a minute to pause and reflect on, okay, and think about, even in that situation, why that person might have had that bias. And we're all shaped by life experiences, right? And so that's very honest and very real. And even the beginning slides tried to hone in on that point. So thank you for sharing. It's a very honest and thoughtful perspective. Any other comments? So, we will certainly look into that and think about that. We don't currently have one on the books, but. Oh, yes, we will repeat this session tomorrow. So we're working on that to think about a plan. Mm-hmm. Oh, and also, I'll use that as an opportunity to plug Naperville Neighbors United. They also have a part 2 of their Implicit Bias series that will take place on January 29th. January the 29th at the Naperville Municipal Center. So it will be there in the evening. So Naperville Neighbors United. So that's a follow-up. And that presentation will be facilitated by Dr. Adrienne Coleman. And she is the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at the Illinois Math and Science Academy. And I had the pleasure of doing part 1 of that series back in September with my counterpart at District 204, Jennifer Rowe. So that is the next opportunity. Any other parting thoughts or reflections?
Nobody wants softball. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the district for even providing this platform or putting this together and getting the thoughts out and making this type of conversation, what do you call it, interactive, right? So I really appreciate what you guys are doing here. I landed in Naperville by mistake. Well, not mistake, but I know a lot of people came for the schools. Mine was an emergency situation and I ended up here. But I did not want to come to Naperville. But I am happy that I did. And I'm elated. Like, I love what's happening here. And I love the fact that it's not being brushed under the rug, and that we are getting in front of some of the unforeseen circumstances, right? And to help our children and to develop their minds, I think giving them a little bit more than what we've had. So I definitely appreciate that. And I have to say, so I kind of landed in Naperville, but I'm happy I landed where I landed because we have the best principal. And I'm not just saying this because he's here, but so thank you. Like honestly, I have a 26-year-old and a 19-year-old and a now 10-year-old. And so I've been doing this parenting thing and school thing since, at a very young age. My first kid at 17, and we've been through quite a few schools, and I'm just telling you, like, honestly, like, Mr. Bogert, like, you're the best. I don't know where you guys found him, but and that's not to take away from anyone else, but just like with this topic, this issue, like, he's so involved, and we can tell, not just me, but my daughter, like, we can tell that he's genuine and what he does, like when he reaches out, and then it's not just the black kids. Mr. Bogert constantly, like, puts it out to the kids and the parents, like, together we can. And that's what he's been pushing, like, since day one. And this helped me to even want to be involved in the school, because honestly, with my experiences and implicit biases I'm gonna say I had, you don't want to be involved in a school because of what you feel like you're up against. And I can honestly say that he's made me feel like we matter, that we're not just going to him to talk, that something's going to happen, and then the whole district. So I just want to say thank you to all of you, and you too, Rakita. Thank you for that addition. So I appreciate it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. That was a really nice reminder to all of the school administrators in the room about creating an environment where people feel welcomed, valued, and respected, and where they want to actually be a true part of the school community. So thank you for that. So thank you all for engaging in this critical conversation about implicit bias, which I hope has helped all of us grow together as a community. Thank you so much. Have a good night.